Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions. Deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back, everyone. It's Monday, and are we ready for a week of live radio with me, your host, Kev Baker, right here on the Kev Baker Show on TFRlive.com. Hope we've all had a nice, refreshing weekend. I've recharged the batteries. I am raring to go. Waiting to hear the music there at the start of the show, and that's it now. An amazing transformation takes place, and I become the Kev Baker Show for the next 2 hours. It's going to be a brilliant 2 hours yet again tonight, because it's Monday, and Mondays mean that we get to spend some quality time with our good friend, a fellow host on the network, author, researcher, and the man we love. That is, of course, Mr. Anthony Patch. He's with us here again tonight. You can find him over at anthonypatch.com. Johnny Whistles, I believe, will be back with us in hour number 2 tonight, so we can catch up with John and we can get a little laugh about why he wasn't there for Freaky Friday. But more of that coming up. And of course, Anthony, it's great to have you back tonight, and I hope you've enjoyed your weekend. We had another brilliant show over on your show on Friday, and here we are again. I keep saying it, but time is speeding up, man.
Yeah, it's kind of like those revolving doors at the hotel. They keep smacking us in the butt and making us go back to work.
But you know, how is it, though, that even though we've increased all the shows we now do 6 hours of live radio a week, and yet there still isn't enough time to cover all the topics, Tony?
I think you better talk to Chris Geo and see what we can do about getting some more airtime.
Oh, don't. You're creating an absolute animal here. But, Tony, I'm over here in the UK, and obviously news this weekend has been dominated by these absolutely horrendous scenes that are coming out of Texas. We've had Hurricane Harvey, as predicted, slamming into the Texas coast. Freaky Friday, we were watching as it moved from a Category 3 to a Category 4. And some of the images that I've seen, Tony, of some of the flooding that's happening there, I mean, it's probably quite easy to call it biblical-type flooding, but, I mean, it's not exaggerating, is it?
No, not at all. And, first of all, our thoughts and prayers, of course, go out to everyone in the storm area and everyone that's, affected by this. And I think that one thing to keep in mind is the economic impact, because not only do we have just massive numbers of homes, but we've got businesses that really, for all intents and purposes, may never come back. So, the economic impact on people is going to be felt for years, and FEMA has even said they're going to be in the area for many, many years.
And they're expecting maybe up to another 50 inches of rain to drop on Houston, which seems to be one of the most affected areas. I heard them saying today they were actually referring to it as the Gulf of Houston. But some of the kind of facts here coming out, it says Hurricane Harvey has left thousands homeless in Houston, with 5,000 people currently in shelters. Number expected to rise. We've got another 50 inches of rain. We're going to talk about the path of this storm in just a moment. We've also got 2 major dams 20 miles outside of the city that are being drained, and that, of course, is adding to the problem, sending more water into homes. Despite the unfolding disaster, the mayor has still not issued a mandatory evacuation order across the city. Now, scores of residents are taking to social media, having to beg for help for people to come and get them out of their houses. 911 or 911 operators are stretched to their limit. There was a backlog of 150 calls at any given time on Sunday. We've got the Red Cross, they're fundraising, and we've got celebrities as well. And it's going to take a lot of money to get that anywhere near what it was. It says the official death toll, it's unknown. But before the show, Anthony was informing me that, unfortunately, terrible news is that so far 6 people have lost their lives, and it's a horrible thing to say, but with this still developing, and really we're yet to see the full toll, probably, the human toll of this disaster. And it says here, finally, Tony, that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has deployed the entire National Guard of 12,000 to rescue stranded citizens. And we'll start there because you were saying to me that while you were watching the images of this, there was something missing. It didn't seem like much military there, was there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't control the television cameras, and they're trying to keep their reporters out of, the extreme areas, out of the harm's way. But with that said, we really don't see much activity on the part of the U.S. military. Now, I understand that the National Guard, 5,000 troops and that sort of thing from the state itself being deployed. But even at that, I don't see very many high water vehicles like 2.5 ton, 5 ton, 10 ton trucks, and not many Humvees that at least are, absent from the camera images. Now, I'm not in, a position to say that they're not doing their job. It just seems odd to me, and I would appreciate it if the media would begin broadcasting images of what the military is actually doing. And for people that are not familiar with Texas, Fort Hood, Texas, is right there to the west of Houston and just south of Austin. And it's smack dab in the middle of this entire storm, where the worst of it, the center, the eye tracked right on through. And yet I've not heard any reports about, an impact as far as damage to Fort Hood. But it sure seems to me, with the number of personnel, the trucks of any type, most of them are high water capable, and certainly boats, because yesterday the media was putting out an all call through the governor, through the mayors, an all call to the citizens for small boats to conduct rescues. In my opinion, that does not seem appropriate. I think the military should have been able to handle that. Go ahead.
No, I absolutely see where you're coming from here, Tony. But again, maybe it's just as well that the citizens have been allowed in to help here, because if it was anything like Katrina, we would probably have FEMA just locking off the city for a couple of days and everyone would be left to their own devices. So it's good to see people actually going and helping one another, especially in America at this time when the media are pushing this whole division, the fact that we're on the verge of some kind of civil war, but yet when some kind of disaster hits, we soon forget our politics and we know we can come together. We have to come together. And something else I want to speak about with this storm, Tony, is the path that it's taken. Now, like I was admitting to you before we came on air, I mean, I'm no kind of meteorologist. I don't watch these storms, how they track up through the Gulf of Mexico, etc. But there was talk of this one coming up, going into Houston, dumping all of this water, going back out, and then coming in again. Now, we've had a little look at the path of the storm, Anthony, and it's not exactly your typical hurricane, is it?
No, even when the eye of the storm initially was offshore, the National Weather Service made the comment that they had never seen a computer model of the projected pathway such as was being displayed. And this, again, was when it was offshore. They were showing it moving right up into the, into the San Antonio area and Corpus Christi, right on the coast, and that it was making a loop. Once it hit landfall, it would extend in a ways, and then it would loop back, almost to follow and retrace its own pathway, its own steps, and then go offshore. And they were, several of the scientists were saying, we have never seen a storm do that before. And now today, that's exactly what it's doing. And it is actually going to make a third landfall now, and it's going to track the eye of it right into Houston once more, and eventually head due north and northeast away from Dallas itself for people who want a point of reference.
And, I do find this quite interesting. And, of course, we often speak to people like Ilana Freeland and Dane Wigington as well. And we ourselves bring up HAARP, Tony. the High
Yep.
Aurora Active Research Program up in Gacona, Alaska. And it's certainly worthy of further investigation, i.e. was HAARP on at the time, because we know they have these weather weapons. And when it's hurricanes and HAARP, there's something that came into my mind today, and I was sharing with you before the show, and I bet when we actually put this out on air, there's going to be some listeners out there who had no idea that this was going on, because there was, if we go back 16 years almost, that's right, 16 years to September the 11th, 2001. Now, we all know that day became very, very famous for all the wrong reasons. But did you know, at the very same time as all of that was going on in New York, just off the coast, there was a hurricane called Erin. And this was another hurricane that acted very, very strangely indeed. And Anthony, you had heard about this hurricane, and of course you with your scientific mind, you were able to kind of connect more of the dots here. And we're pulling on some of the research from Judy Wood as well, but this is another hurricane where it could have the fingerprints or kind of telltale signs that HAARP was involved.
Yeah, Dr. Judy Woods put out a fantastic book. I don't have it right in front of me at the moment. Maybe you can find the name of that while I'm talking, but I do want to give credit to her because she did some great investigative work in which she provided some phenomenal photographic evidence of the debris of 9/11, and specifically the steel beams that were literally appearing like pasta, the way that they had been melted and twisted. So there's also been some research that she put out, as well as other people, that there was a directed energy weapon utilized. And I'm going to be specific about that. The scenario that is being offered up, I have no proof, but the scenario that's been offered up is a directed energy weapon consisting of accelerated particles, accelerated by the synchrotron particle accelerator, a ring-based accelerator at Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York, not far from the Twin Towers, that at the same time as this 9/11 event, the synchrotron was in active mode. It was accelerating particles, and it does appear that there is a straight line of sight between the laboratory from the synchrotron to the Twin Towers. And interestingly, the local zoning regulations for the height restrictions of the buildings between the 9/11 towers and the laboratory itself all mandated a maximum height which would have allowed a straight line of sight projection of particles from Brookhaven directly at the towers. Now, Dr. Judy Wood put that out, and there's some other people that put that out. That's not my research, but that's just something else to keep in mind. Now, besides that scenario, we have the hurricane. So did you want to jump in there?
No, on you go, Tony, because this is, like you were saying there, I mean, we can't say this is exactly what happened. And in fact, we agreed before the show that the one thing we do know about 9/11 is that we'll never have a clear picture of the exact sequence of events that happened that day.
Yeah, that's very true. The Hurricane Erin, the track that it was providing on radar just prior to the towers being attacked indicated that it was going to track, basically from South Carolina, North Carolina, up along the eastern seaboard, and that it would continue up the eastern seaboard to just above New York, just above Boston, and then track off into the ocean to the east. However, at the same time that the synchrotron particle accelerator at Brookhaven was active, the storm path took a direct turn to the west. If you picture yourself putting your thumb over the hurricane track, over the map, and trace out a thumb that is pointing due west towards New York, that's the shape of the storm path, the hurricane path, where it was pulled directly towards New York. And then once the synchrotron particle accelerator at Brookhaven was switched off, it immediately looped back to the east, retracing to the north along the seaboard its original intended pathway as predicted by the Weather Service. Now, this is something that has not been presented very much in the public arena, but that is definitely what happened, Hurricane Aaron, and Kev has put up the link from Wikipedia. So even Wikipedia has this hurricane in its track indicated. But that's something that, from a physics standpoint, is feasible. When you consider the strong magnetic lines of force that come off of a ring-based synchrotron particle accelerator, there is that potential. And we don't know all of the technology that was employed in this directed energy scenario. But it is very odd to look at the timing of that storm path altering at what appears to be simultaneously the energizing of a directed energy weapon towards the Twin Towers.
And I've even posted a picture in the chat room at tfrlive.com/chat. And you can see exactly what you're describing there, Anthony. That is a really strange path. And, you know, like you were saying, we can't prove this is what happened when Brookhaven were turning the machine on, but these energies that are given off, I mean, these are basically quantum or cosmic rays. So it is feasible that that could be directed as some kind of energy weapon. And then when we see this kind of erratic path that it took, certainly worthy, again, of more investigation. And if we come back to present day, Tony, and what's going on in Texas right now, there might be people out there that think, well, why on earth's name would they do something like this? And of course, it's economic. And we've got this Agenda 21 thing where they want to force everyone into these big, huge mega cities. Not that Houston isn't a mega city in itself, but there's a lot of reasons why they would either steer one of these or entirely conjure one up with their weather weapons.
Yeah, and, you know, I'm going to be a little bit reluctant to really go down that path. I want to see how this thing plays out a little more, and kind of like I did with the Mandela effect, I held off in that situation for 6 months, taking a look at what was going on with the Mandela effect before I really, you know, gave any public statements about it. So whether it was HAARP or anything else that was used to create, manipulate, you know, if you will, conjure up this storm, and that's kind of a segue to something we're going to go into in a moment. But it's very odd, the storm pathway, the severity of it. Last night I went on Google Maps and approximated the diameter of this storm in its entirety was over 600 miles in diameter from basically its maximum, more of an oval, let's say, from east to west. But that is unprecedented, along with the storm path. And, of course, 50 inches of rain that they're still expecting on top of what they've had. They've had anywhere from 2 feet to 4 feet of rain, depending on the area. So you mentioned the two dams just above Houston. Yeah, those are controlled releases, because if the dams let loose, it will then even further inundate downtown Houston itself. And boy, that would be probably worse than what happened to New Orleans.
Yeah, we'll definitely keep our eye on what's happening here. And thoughts and prayers go out to everyone, anywhere kind of near that situation. I can't even imagine what it must be like. Some of the images that I've seen, you know, entire lives, communities ruined, absolutely ruined. Let's just hope that they can get back to some sense of normality as quickly as possible. And we're talking about all this. On you go, Tony.
No, just real quick. Remember, I mentioned that the city of Dallas, which is to the north of Houston, about roughly 4 hours. If you're driving at 4.5 hours, they're preparing the convention center in downtown Dallas to accept 5,000 evacuees. And I certainly hope we don't hear the word refugee ever used in this country related to disasters, but these are certainly evacuees at this point. So that's just the latest. I wanted to toss that in real quick.
I mean, that's quite a populated area, Houston, isn't it? I mean, 5,000, I would expect that number's probably going to increase, right?
Yeah, that's just for the convention center in Dallas that they're accepting. But yes, definitely people are being relocated all throughout Texas. And most of them will go to the north for obvious reasons. So, yeah, Dallas, Fort Worth, all of those areas along the 820 corridor. 35 is the main that runs north and south out of San Antonio. That's a major evacuation route because it's it's west of the storm track itself. So, yeah, Texas has got their hands full.
Well, we're back on Wednesday night. You'll be joining me again, and we'll have some clearer picture, hopefully, of just the extent of what's happened then. We'll be able to talk about this a little further.
Real quick, I do have a personal friend. I retired after 27 years as a paramedic in Oakland. One of my longtime partners that I worked with, he is with FEMA. He's still with the private company, American Medical Response, but he's part of what used to be called the DMAT teams. But they're basically disaster task forces, and they came out of California to Texas, and they've been deployed for a couple of days now. They're on a 2-week deployment, and he's down in the San Antonio area, the last I heard from him. So I hope to get some sort of firsthand reporting, but his initial statement to me when he got there was, the place is a zoo.
It's an absolute nightmare, and I've heard reports of, obviously this always happens, you've got the looting and all that kind of stuff going on. And Tony, we've got a few minutes before we go to break, and we'll pick up with something new on the other side, but because we've got a kind of bigger UK audience listening to this, and I was asking you before the show, how does it work with FEMA? Because we obviously heard about the disaster when it was New Orleans and stuff like that. And it's not a case of just FEMA turn up, is it? Because it has to go through, there's kind of things that have to happen before the government can get involved, right?
Yeah, it's always a tiered process. They always default to the local governments on site. So basically, city and county, they go to the state and ask for help and resources and aid. And then when the state feels like it is going to be exhausting its capabilities, or in this case, obviously overrun in a very short period of time, then they go to the federal government, which would be FEMA. Now, FEMA did a good job this time. They pre-deployed at the outskirts of the projected affected areas. From what I can tell, they're doing a good job. As I said earlier, before we go to the break here real quick, I just would like to see more evidence of not just the National Guard, but the U.S. Army. And they may be out there. They may be just, something that I'm not aware of because I'm not in the middle of it. But it is disheartening when I don't see the military vehicles on the news and seeing citizens having to pull out their bass boats, their john boats, their shallow draft boats, and go up and down their city streets, which are now lakes and rivers, having to rescue their fellow citizens. I know the Coast Guard's been overwhelmed with air operations, lifting people off of rooftops from their homes. But, I would just like, if there are folks that can contribute into the chat room, I know Carol and a few people have put up the stripes.com/Texas National Guard Coast Guard aid rescue efforts in Houston. But, if I was President Trump, just for a moment, I would have done a full court press. I would have looked at this like, okay, this is an invasion hitting our shores. This is an amphibious operation. We're rolling everybody out of Fort Hood, Texas, and we're going to meet them at the beach. That would have been my scenario.
No, absolutely. And, this is the thing. They knew this storm was coming. The weathermen, they've been talking about this for a while now. And it strikes me how so many people were honestly caught out by this. That's what really, really gets me, especially in this day and age. Now, we'll be back after the break. We've got lots more to get into. But again, just thinking of everything that's going on out there, often people like ourselves, conspiracy analysts, when we hear the word FEMA, we automatically think bad. We think of FEMA camps and all the nefarious stuff that we've heard and all the various documentaries and read in documents. But there we go, just listening to Tony there and thinking about it. Bigger picture here, it's the same as anything else. There's two sides to this. And here's FEMA now, hopefully doing a good job down there in Texas, because we only know the people absolutely need that right now. And of course, before we go to break, let me take this chance then to remind you all, tomorrow night, right here on the Kev Baker Show, we've got Gary Heseltine, right, the UK UFO expert. He will be on the show in the second hour with myself and Mr. Johnny Whistles. We're going to be getting into all the UFO topics. I'll be asking him about the latest news coming out on these alien mummies from Peru. And join us after the break when we get into some really, really strange kind of topics. Join us.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Kev Baker, and you're tuned into the Kev Baker Show right here on truthfrequencyradio.com, where we say that silence is consent. I want to thank you all for tuning in yet again. I'm looking forward to another week of big shows right here on KBS, and it starts tonight with my good friend Anthony Patch. You can find his work over at anthonypatch.com. Now, we were talking about Hurricane Harvey before the break, and Melissa Taylor in the chat room, great comment here. It says, Kev, the mayor said, do not evacuate, shelter in place. And she thinks this was done on purpose so they can basically criticize Trump and make him look like a failure, Tony. And she's coming from Austin, Texas. And this is something I have heard being said as well, that it could almost be as if they want this crisis so they can point the finger at Trump. And that's how low this is getting now.
Yeah, I would agree with Melissa. And, I've not said this on the air too many times, but I am in Texas. I'm just outside of Dallas. And so I'm following the local news very carefully. Melissa, I agree with you. The shelter in place is ridiculous. What they're trying to do by saying that, I understand, is to say that they don't want to put people on the highways. They don't want millions of people jamming the highways and then creating a larger crisis because people are caught in the flash flood zones overtaking the highways, therefore overtaking the cars and flooding people on the highways. So I understand that. I think what we have to do is back up and say, how much warning did they have? Like Lucky had posted in the chat room here. I agree with that. I mean, you and I just said it, Kev. They've had almost a week's warning in which they could have evacuated people with no threat of any flash flooding because the storm had not come ashore yet, and could have evacuated, let's say, the more high-risk people, the elderly, the handicapped, that sort of thing. And this could have been a better coordinated event. We've had plenty of practice in evacuating people. Certainly the worst is Katrina in terms of a example of what not to do with a hurricane. Now, if this had just hit us like, tornadoes with no warning, that would be a different situation. But to shelter in place in a flood zone and knowing what the track was, and that this was going to be a direct hit on Houston, Corpus Christi, San Antonio, Victoria, all of these areas, I think it's unconscionable of the government, and I'm going to say from local right on up to the president, everyone in between, to say shelter in place when you had plenty of time to do the evacuation of the most high-risk people and those without transportation of their own.
This is what really gets me as well, Tony, because it's not as if the forecasters were saying, well, it might be just a little kind of storm. They were shocked at the kind of forecasts that they were seeing. And somebody has to be responsible for this, because in this day and age I know forecasting isn't perfect, but like you say, we should have learned lessons from the past, especially Katrina. And I think it's just shocking, absolutely shocking, that anyone in a position of power has told anyone to basically wait and die, because that might sound a bit harsh, but in reality, that's what they've been told to do.
Yeah, we're not talking about levees breaking. We're not talking about failure of pumps in the levee systems. We're not talking about dams breaking. We're talking about rainfall. And yeah, the winds were devastating along the coast down in Corpus Christi and places like that, and literally knocking buildings down with the winds. But once that was done along the coastline, it's the heavy rainfall. Now, they're always going to come back with, the government will always come back and say, we did shelter in place instructions because we were only anticipating, 12 inches of rain, something like that. They'll always fall back and say, we didn't expect the amount of water. This is unprecedented. This is a 500-year storm. Therefore, you can't blame us. Well, that's pure nonsense because, like you said, Kev, the forecasting showed the amount of water that was going to come ashore. Besides the winds, it showed the amount of moisture content. Now, to add insult to injury, and maybe they didn't expect this next statement, this next scenario, but when it came ashore and basically parked just outside of downtown San Antonio and outside of Houston, it began to draw moisture. The edges of the circulating storm began to draw moisture off the coast and had this long arm of moisture, of rain, that was being sucked into the edges of the storm and in a cyclonic fashion, pulling it into Houston. So that really exacerbated the problem because it wasn't just the eye of the storm. Now it was the edge of the storm as well that was creating this horrendous downpour, torrential downpour. But again, I'm going to stick with my guns here. They had the forecast. They knew it was going to be a big storm. Whether it was 2 feet or 50 inches, you still got flooding. And they should have evacuated these people out of their homes northward along the highways before the highways were in jeopardy.
No, absolutely. I couldn't concur with you more there. And like I said earlier, we'll keep our eye on this. And Tony's back with myself and Johnny on Wednesday night. So that gives us tomorrow night. We'll see what's happening. And then on Wednesday, we'll have a quick talk about this. But, I fear, Tony, this one isn't going away. And I don't think we've seen anything yet, to be honest with you, with yet more rain forecast to be dumped in that area. So, again, thoughts and prayers to anyone out there who is affected by it. And, we'll move on to our next topic now. And it's not wholly unrelated, but this kind of shows you how synchronicity works and the lives of Kev Baker and Anthony Patch, because I started to kind of have a look around for some stories to bat between myself and Johnny and Tony tonight. And as per usual, I ended up on the Daily Mail. And I seen one story that really caught my attention, and it was to do with future warfare. And it says here how underwater warfare could look in the year 2051. So I start reading this, and I'm going to read it to you here, and then I'll explain why there's a kind of synchronicity to this story. Because it says here that futuristic submarine designers, or submarine designs that mimic real marine creatures, have been created for a Royal Navy project to show how underwater warfare could look in 2051. Now, the concepts unveiled include a crude mothership shaped like a manta ray and fish-shaped torpedoes sent to swarm against enemy targets. And it says here that this mothership, conceived by a group of young British engineers and scientists, or so they say, would be crewed by up to 20 people who would use their minds to control the ship. Now, at this point, I hadn't seen the art or the concept art that was attached to this story, but already there was something in the back of my mind saying, why does this seem awfully familiar? And that's because, Mr. Patch, we joke about you being ahead of the curve. You're at the crest of the wave, if we're going to follow the kind of pun on this one, man. Because in your book, 2048, Diamonds in the Rough, it just happened to feature one of the coolest bits of tech that I've ever read about in a long time. And this was, of course, a submarine that just happened to be shaped like a what? A manta ray. Now, they say that this idea is an original idea from British engineer and scientist, Tony. I really hope you copyrighted that design of yours.
Well, I copyrighted the book and the cover had a manta ray on it. 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. The submarine is a 300-foot wide manta ray shaped submarine from tip to tip, from wingtip to wingtip. The wings are flexible. It does fly underwater and it does fly in the air. And it is composed of nanodiamonds, the hull, nanodiamonds, which self-replicate, self-repair, basically are impenetrable. This is all based upon actual science. This is the application of actual material science to the shape of a manta ray submarine. It is operated by a small crew of both Navy SEALs and holographic crew members, comprising less than 20 crew members. It has an onboard computer system, which is a 600-cell tetrahedrally shaped spherical 6-foot diameter computer. The nanodiamonds make up the structure of the computer as well as the qubits. It is sentient. It starts out at age 14 and progressively ages during the storyline to age 33. And being self-aware and sentient, it not only operates the submarine, but it communicates with the crew as a hologram, and they are able to operate the submarine either by thought processes in communication, quantum entanglement with the onboard computer system, quantum entanglement communications, and they can operate the submarine itself themselves that way and communicate between themselves, not just the holographic crew members, but the Navy SEALs themselves that are on board. And this is quantum entangled with another sentient quantum computer located in a missile silo in Oklahoma. And that is a 60-foot diameter, spherically arranged, 600-cell tetrahedral quantum computer composed of nanodiamonds for qubits. So that's the short of the story overview. But I believe that these guys read my book, 2048 Diamonds in the Rough, took their cues from that, and virtually everything about this submarine is identical to the operation of my submarine.
It's and like I said when I sent this to you, Tony, I was in two minds, because I thought you're either going to laugh at how strikingly similar it is, or you were going to get quite angry at the obvious kind of plagiarism of your ideas. Because it says here, I mean, you just listened to Anthony Patch give you an overview of what was in his 2013 fictional, air quotes, book, right? And just listen to what they're talking about in the real world in the Daily Mail today. Because they're saying the concepts unveiled include a crude mothership like a manta ray. And then it goes on to say that the mothership, conceived by a group of young British engineers and scientists, would be crewed by up to only 20 people who would use their minds to control the ship. Now, obviously, in that, Anthony, they don't go into the science of the fact that by this point, they probably have taken some kind of neural lace or triple helix DNA technology that will merge them with the machine, right?
Right. And I make it simple. I just call it quantum entanglement, so we don't get into, the third strand of DNA or any of that nonsense. But their propulsion system, they say that they are using a hybrid algae electric cruising power propulsion technology. Now, in my book, the submarine draws its power from the sun using photosynthesis, which is the same thing as algae electric cruising power. It also draws oxygen from seawater, and it draws its energy from the surrounding seawater itself for electric power. It uses its wings to fly through the water as well as through the air, same thing that a manta ray does. Now, a manta ray only leaps out of the water, it doesn't fly, but I take some license with that. But it is very similar to the systems that I proposed, and in mine, it also has green blood, sort of the Vulcan idea, but it has green blood because it is using photosynthesis for its energy system, and its life systems operate using a fern that comes out of New Zealand, which is a fern that is a fractal fern. meaning that its spirals in a fractal manner replicate towards the center of this, and that forms the heart that pumps the green blood of the submarine itself. There you go.
And, I'm sitting smiling because now that I'm thinking about it, I should have known right away when I was reading that book that me and you were I hate to say kindred spirits with all the stuff we get into, Tony, right? But the fact that the name that you gave this Manta submarine, that in itself told me that we kind of work on the same frequency, right? We really do. We're singing off the same song sheet, because tell the audience what you actually called it.
Steve Irwin. That's the name of the sub. Steve Irwin. Obviously,
Steve Irwin, God bless him. He was taken from us, and he was the Australian gentleman who was always out there. They called him the crocodile hunter. You're bound to remember the guy, blonde hair, just your typical Australian guy. And he was, Tony, he was a real character, wasn't he? And ironically enough, we lost him after he was stung, wasn't he, in the water?
Yeah, the scenario was that the tail of a stingray, which is a barb, has a barb, sometimes two barbs on the tail, actually penetrated his heart in the water, and that killed him within moments. I mean, his heart bled out right there from being stabbed in the heart. It was tragic, and I really enjoyed his show. I really enjoyed what he did. When my kids were young, we used to watch the show all the time together, and so that was in memory of him, acknowledging the hero submarine to Steve Irwin, and the sentient computer on board. They just referred to him as Steve.
Well, I don't think it's a coincidence that these guys just randomly came up with this idea, Tony. And like I say, when you're reading it there from this article, it's quite embarrassingly similar to what you put forth in 2048 Diamonds in the Rough. And, we've got 10 minutes or so before the break, and just thinking about this, you can imagine all the top kind of tech people, they've probably all taken a stab at designing some kind of future weapon, future transport, something like that. And right now, we've got all the tech kind of people from Silicon Valley and everywhere else. They've all kind of congregated together for something called the Burning Man Festival, haven't they?
They have. And there is I'm going to make a leap here. This is pure conjecture, speculation. Burning Man took place all last week, and it concluded with the burning of their temple. Now, it used to be a large anthropomorphic sculpture of wood that looked like a man in the middle of the desert that they would burn on the last day, which was yesterday, Sunday. Yesterday, they burnt basically what looks like a pagoda, their temple. And within that, all these people had contributed notes and letters and things that they wanted to place in this temple. And then everything was burned to the ground, which is what they normally do every year. But these are rituals. These are satanic rituals. This has nothing to do with God, the Creator. And I've been out to the desert, to the playa, as it's called. It's a dry lake bed now. During the winter, it's flooded. But it is in the Black Rock Desert in Nevada. And I used to do training out there with some guys that I won't go into. But the point is, I've been there. I've seen the people. I've never been to the festival itself, but I've seen the people after. These are freaks. Sorry, folks, but these are freaks. And it's nothing more than just it's an excuse to have these rituals. Obviously, drugs are heavily involved there. The intelligence agencies, anybody who has been to Burning Man or knows about it, I'll tell you, that place is loaded with undercover cops and intelligence operatives in that place. And we're going to be talking about the connection between that and Google after the break, or maybe we'll have time to talk about Google, Kev. But here's my conjecture. The timing of this storm, of this hurricane, and the timing of these rituals, satanic, devil-worshiping people, lost souls out in the desert, is lockstep with the development of this storm and the timing of it coming ashore and the major impacts that we felt yesterday during the burning of their satanic temple. So, maybe there's a connection.
Let's throw the eclipse in there as well. And Tony, I welcome you into my land of speculation and conjecture. This is where I always hang out. We don't even have to give a disclaimer on the Kev Baker Show when we're going there anymore. But I've posted some pictures in the chat room, and, it's very, very symbolic. And you look at the drone footage that's been taken over the years of the city that just springs up in Black Rock Desert there, Tony. I mean, that in itself, it looks like one of the colliders almost at CERN that you're looking, a kind of aerial shot of this place. And there's a whole lot of kind of occult, kind of ritualistic woo that's attached to this whole thing. And like we were saying as I led into this, that a lot of the techie people, the Silicon Valley people, they all go to this kind of thing. It's almost like a passage of right from what I've been reading today. But Google, Google of all companies, they've got quite an interesting association with the Burning Man, don't they?
They do. They selected their present CEO, and they actually interviewed him. They conducted the interview. This is so bizarre. They conducted his final selection interview out at Burning Man, a place that the founders of Google attend every year, the Burning Man, along with a lot of their employees. And it was a test to see if he could blend in, if he could become part of the community, if he could commune with the spirits, if he could become one with the huge community of thousands of people out there, or if he was just going to be kind of a stuffed shirt, CEO business type guy. Well, he passed the test because he blended in with the community and got involved in the group thing. Now, the reason I bring this up is this is what Google is pushing on the world, is this sense of community, this sense of communing with spirits, the sense of becoming one. What Google is trying to do, along with D-Wave, along with Elon Musk, sorry to say, Kev Baker, is this hive mentality, pulling the whole world under the umbrella into this matrix of the sentient world simulation. So they had to have a freak for a CEO who would get tuned in and tuned out, into this whole kind of hippie type thing. Now, I'm 64, so I get to say hippie. These are freaks that are running Google. They're going to shut my computer down. They're going to shut my YouTube down, I'm sure, because I'm calling them out. But you know what? Too bad, because these people are worshiping Satan, and I'm calling it out as I see it.
Well, I even seen some of the effigies that they had for burning, and with it being Burning Man, they burn effigies, right? And there was goats' heads there. There was all sorts of things. And when you look at this, that screen, that kind of aerial shot that I posted of this city that just springs up in the desert, they're almost in a circle. And, a circle's magic. You had witches there, the witches' circle, stuff like that. And Tony's quite right with what he's saying here, because even I said it to you today in an email, Tony, that this sounds very much like a kind of micro of the hive mind that we talk about that's set for us all. Because they're talking about when you get all of these people together, it's a one big community and there's a vibe going on and you live in the circle, so there's no kind of leader and everyone comes together, and that consciousness, that kind of collective consciousness, it works, right? It's a totally alternative kind of way to live, a totally different kind of way to the systems we're used to. And they're definitely pushing something at this Burning Man. I hadn't really paid it too much attention until you had brought it up to me some time ago. But, even looking at where it's held, is that the same place where they done the symmetry dance for the kind of CERN video?
That was my thought when I first saw the symmetry video produced by CERN, was that they filmed it out at the dry lake bed, the white playa of the Black Rock Desert. And it really looks like it. When I look in the far background of that video, it looks like the mountain range back there where I was doing a lot of training with some guys. And we trained on the desert, and then we went up in the mountains and did our training up there. And I'm very familiar with the Black Rock. I think that was in their symmetry video.
And there's energetic areas naturally on this planet. Who only knows what kind of ley lines they're doing this kind of festival on. And when it comes to any of these festivals, I mean, even the ones that have got no nefarious intentions at all, when you do get a group of people like that together, there is almost a coalescence of the consciousness. There is a vibe, there is an energy there. But when it's something like Burning Man, Tony, I think they're absolutely vampiring any kind of energy that's going on there.
Yeah, and if you look at the temple, the pictures, it's an octagonal arranged building. The octagon is the same thing as the cross-sectional shape, the configuration of the detectors at CERN. CERN is all about 8. It's all about the ogdoad. It's all about the number 8. It's all about what we saw with the egg, the ogdoad, and the eclipse. And there's your tie between Burning Man, the eclipse, and CERN itself, and the rituals that take place.
And talking of eggs, the shiny-headed one himself will be with us after the break. No, not Anthony Patch. Well, he'll be here as well. Johnny Whistles will be joining us. And on a more serious note, before we go out to break, a little bit of breaking news coming across from Russia today there. That's right, he's been at it again, Little Kim. He's just fired off unidentified projectiles which have flown over Japan. So if anything else breaks on that, I will let you know. But we'll be back for the second half of the show. And don't forget, Anthony Patch, he's got his own show right here on the network as well. Every Friday, 10 p.m. in the UK, 5 p.m. on the East Coast, and that's 2 p.m. on the West Coast for the Anthony Patch Show. I'm his co-host on there before I jump onto Freaky Friday. So honestly, Fridays is off the charts right here on TFRlive.com. Don't go anywhere. Start the countdown. We'll be right back.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
That's right, folks. The New World Order is going down, and it starts right here on the Kev Baker Show on TFRlive.com. I'm Kev Baker. We've got Anthony Patch. He's locked and loaded for hour number 2 here. And as promised, the egghead himself is with us. Johnny Whistles, how you doing, big man?
I'm doing fine, Kev. Thanks very much. And I think June thought I was having some sort of fit there, but I was just doing a dance to the music.
I love that, John. It makes me think back to when we first started out. Chris and Cherie serenaded us in, absolutely brilliant. But Johnny, before we go anywhere, right, I know all the people out there, they're absolutely aghast at the fact you're here tonight, because what happened on Friday, dude?
I think sleep deprivation kicked in, Kev. I was talking to people on Facebook at the back of 11, and usually, Kev, I will come on at past, before the show. No. Next thing I know, it's 4:15.
And there was us all feeling sorry for you, John. We thought you might have been sick again, stuff like that. No, I'm only busting you, man. It's great to have you back tonight. And of course, we've got our kind of third member of the team here tonight, Johnny. Anthony Patch is live with us. Find him at anthonypatch.com. And I'm really excited now because I love to talk about the next topic. It's Elon Musk. That's right. I can hear people sharpening knives already. They're throwing things at their monitors because they can't understand how I have got any time for this billionaire cat. But what's he been up to this time? Well, it's nothing new per se, because we're back to this new company of his, Neural Link. And of course, this is what has caused so much controversy out there, because Elon Musk has a plan to save humanity, in his eyes, that is. And that is for us to be kind of sure that AI will not turn against us one day. The best thing that we can do is take some kind of layer of technology that would make us symbiotic with the machines. A neural link, per se. And like I say, this is back in the news now. It says Elon Musk's 27 million, quotes, matrix plan to plug the human brain into a computer, well, it's been revealed. And it says that the controversial startup to create a matrix interface to plug the human brain directly into a computer has raised over $27 million. Called Neuralink, SEC filings have revealed the scale of the firm for the first time. It has raised the 26.96 million of a technically still open funding round that could grow up to $100 million, although Musk took to Twitter to say the firm is no longer raising cash. Says Neuralink is working to link the human brain with a machine interface by creating micro-sized devices. He said creating a brain-machine interface will be vital to help us humans compete with the godlike robots of the near future. Neuralink was registered in California as a, quote, medical research company last July, and he plans on funding the company mostly by himself. It will work on what Musk calls the neural lace technology, implanting tiny brain electrodes that may one day upload and download thoughts. Quote, if I were to communicate a concept to you, you would essentially engage in consensual telepathy. And this is what he told Wait But Why publication. And Neuralink is aiming to launch a product that will help people who suffer from serious brain injuries as a result of disorders such as stroke and cancer in just 4 years. And then 8 to 10 years from now, the Matrix-style technology will be available to everyone. Before I go to Anthony Patch to get his thoughts on that, Johnny whistles, merging with the machines again. He's raising 20-odd million bucks. Going to put the rest in himself, Johnny. Certainly it doesn't look as if this is just some kind of idea anymore. It's going to be coming our way soon.
See, it's like an on-off relationship with Elon Musk, because he comes away with some really good things, and then we get this. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. I've seen somebody, in fact, it's Lizard, saying that robots are going to be really pissed off when they find out we created them to be slaves. So they will turn on us, Kev.
You know, this is what gives rise to the debate, Anthony, and this is why we keep coming back to this topic and why it's one of the most serious threats facing us at this time. Because this AI that Musk and all the others kind of hypothesize, or the hypothetical thing in the future, it's already here, right?
Hyperthize?
Yeah,
hypothize?
Yeah, that's like a new word. It's like Imagineered, that word. Just kind of made it up.
I like that. I like that. So let's hypothize for a moment.
Yeah, it's either that or it sounds like some kind of new wonder cream to clear up a rash.
Why don't you send the word hypothize to BP Earthwatch?
You'll probably think it's a scientific method for something.
It'll be a headline on one of his famous videos.
Okay,
anyway.
Enough of embarrassing me. Enough of that. I need the neural lace, you see.
All right, well, we're going to talk about the limbic system and the cerebral cortex. Is that sophisticated enough for you?
You see, this is why I went Johnny first, and then we come to you for the detailed information. Hit us with it, Tony.
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to read just a real short couple of sentences from Mr. Musk. It indicates here in the article, Musk likened the situation to the cooperation of the limbic system and the cortex in the human brain. Now, what we're talking about here is connecting the limbic system, which is basically where your instincts, your fight or flight mechanism, and I'm being simplistic here, but the limbic system is your fight or flight mechanism. And then your higher thought processes take place in the cerebral cortex. Now, in classes that I used to teach, I would say that the limbic system would be your brainstem, and that would be your first brain. That was the brain that essentially was developed, if you want to think of evolution as a credible model, which I don't, but it would have been the first brain that evolved before the cerebral cortex. So we call that the new brain, the cerebral cortex. What Musk wants to do is interconnect using microscopic electrodes placed in the brain, connect the limbic and the cerebral cortex together. And he wants this to then be an interface with computers, with the AI, to stay a step ahead of AI, because he says that AI will become godlike. And in order for us to cooperate and to stay equal to the AI, we need to be physically connected through a system of interface. Now, I'll let you go ahead and comment on that, and then I'm going to get into some fairly deep details on what all this is.
No, I'm just thinking about this here because, I often refer to the human brain itself like a computer. We've called it a quantum computer at times. And, the science of this, we've seen how they're able to help people that are paralyzed, people who can't hear as well with these cochlear implants and things. This isn't the stuff of science fiction when we're talking about brain-machine interfaces. And I say it all the time, but this is a science that isn't future. It's now.
Yeah, it is. And I'm going to refer to an article that I've composed for the September issue of Entangled magazine. And this one is entitled Brain Hacking. And it ties right into what you're talking about with this article today regarding Elon Musk. And in this article that I'm publishing, we are citing research information regarding what is known as the magnetic field application to stimulate neurons. We're talking about magnetothermal genetic stimulation in the motor cortex, evoking ambulation near the ridge between the ventral and dorsal striatum, causing a freezing of the gait or walking. What we're talking about here is using nanoparticles within the brain, within the neuron membrane, that are activated by a magnetothermal genetic stimulator. I'm going to translate that. We're going back to 5G. We're talking about millimeter wave energy waves being modulated and transmitted into the human brain. You do not need to, as Musk said about 6 months ago, inject a neural lace into an artery and have it attached to the neurons. This article that we're citing here even is deceptive when he talks about electrodes being placed in the brain. That's not where they're going, folks. We're looking at the university papers. Kevin and myself have already read this article and gone through it. This was published in lifesciences.org, this magazine article regarding magnetothermal stimulation. This comes out of the University of Buffalo College of Arts and Sciences. So we're citing the source here. This is the true mechanism by which they will achieve this neural lace, this interface between humans and computers. It is through the heat sensitizing of what is called TRPV1. That's a transient receptor potential chiation channel subfamily V member 1. That is a receptor within the brain. It is a gene receptor in the brain that, utilizing alternating magnetic fields, they will heat these nanoparticles. They call supraparamagnetic. Sounds like a paramedic, doesn't it? Supraparamagnetic nanoparticles on the neural membrane. That's describing the neural lace. These genes are being magnetically heated externally. Now, they don't cite 5G here, but millimeter wave 5G magnetically heats body tissues, cellular tissues. And when they are magnetically and then heat sensitizing this TRPV1 gene within the human brain, they are able to stop people from walking. They're able to change the way they think. They're able to control all body muscular movements of the body externally using 5G millimeter wave transmissions. Go ahead, sir.
Amazing stuff. And Johnny, bring yourself back in here. Many times have we spoke about the chemtrails, John, and all the particulates and the potential for nanotechnology to be swimming about within all of us as we speak. And now we're looking at the 5G just ready to be switched on at any time. I've said often enough, I've got the router here with 5G channel on it. I mean, that's already here. It's not 2020. But this nanotechnology that kind of Musk hints at, Johnny, he's saying that we have to take it. It's going to be an option. But like I said, it's probably in us already, right?
Yeah, I would think so, Kev, because these chemtrails have been going on for years now in every part of the world. So everybody on the planet has these nanoparticulates in it, and it all seems as if it's just ready to do a switch on somewhere, Kev. That's the crazy thing about it. It's like we're all being getting ready for something. Something's going to change, and it's going to change in my mind. Do you know what I mean? That's the way it's going to go.
Absolutely. And, you know, Anthony, just to get your thoughts on this, I'm not sure how hard the science is, but this kind of nanotech, I mean, they talk about some of it being programmable, right? It can do one job, another job, 10 jobs. Would that just be a case of hitting it with a different frequency to make it do either neural lace work or go to building part of a third strand of DNA or maybe turning into some cancer cell?
Well, the 5G, as it's modulated using QAM, it actually doesn't require a different frequency per se. It's the data. It is literally the information defined as the spin of quantum particles. So they're sending literally over the 5G millimeter wave frequency and wavelength information in the form of quantum particles. That's how information is transmitted. It's transmitted on an energy wave. Picture the quantum particles, which you have the wave-particle duality law, in which the particles are in the stream of the waves, and they change the spin of those particles to be ones and zeros. Now, we've talked also about ternary, so it can be -1, 0, and +1, or it can be 0, 1, and 2. Choose your system of ternary. However, the point is that it is not a matter of changing the frequency as it is the information that they're transmitting in the form of the spin of particles. What they're doing is changing the spin of the particles within the human neurons. That's how they control the neurons. They actually go to the quantum level and change the spin. Now, in my Entangled magazine that you're also a contributor to, I have a second article that accompanies this brain hacking article, and that is called In Vivo, which means in the body, In Vivo Third Strand DNA Delivery System. And in that, I go through the process of talking about these nanoparticles and how they are delivered and then attached to the 2 strands of DNA. And therefore, we have a connection between 5G, neural lace, and the third strand of DNA scenario, and that 5G will be the system to throw the switch to activate the dormant nanoparticles within our body, which will then replicate into the third strand of DNA and thus affect the human brain as well.
You know, when you look at this system that they're actually building here, we've all gone through that kind of curve where we've woken up and we've come across things like MK Ultra, mind control. We've covered it often enough here on the show. Actual survivors from MK Ultra programs and things. But it's only until recently, Tony, I mean, it never, ever, ever dawned on me that the level of control that this system that they're setting up here would be almost like having 7 billion of us like puppets on digital strings. Because I never thought it would be down to this individual in your actual mind level. I never contemplated that.
Yeah, and we're getting down into the real nitty-gritty nuts and bolts of how they're doing this within the brain. And there's another article, scientific paper, that you and I have already reviewed. And that has to do with, and this is really amazing stuff, I gotta tell you, we're talking about not just the neural lace and the human brain, but we're now talking about the ability to use the skin of our bodies to create new body organs. And all it requires is a chip that carries biological material in the body to then reproduce that biological material into new organs. And this is by applying the chip first to the skin. And then that chip, which is a nanoparticle material, which they consider to be a container or a cargo container, that nanochip, as it enters the body, carries biological material, specifically DNA and RNA material. So that is your cytosine, your guanine, adenine, and thymine, the CGAT of DNA and RNA. And what they're doing is they're using a very low voltage electrical stimulus to activate these little nano cargo containers that contain the building blocks of DNA. And that electrical signal activates that cargo container, which is nano-sized, we're talking billionths of a meter, to release the biological material within the body and then grow vascular tissue, which means it carries blood and oxygen and nutrients. It creates a vascular tissue, which then results in a specific organ for organ replacement. Now, this is exactly what we're talking about when we talk about sequencing DNA. And I have another article in my June issue of Entangled magazine in which I talk about in silico DNA, meaning they design in the computer the sequence of DNA that they want to create a new biological life form. But in this case, we're talking about sequencing of DNA, digitizing the DNA, and then designing in the computer what organ they want to grow utilizing the system I just talked about, in which they deliver a cargo container activated electronically, releasing DNA, which has been custom designed in silico in the computer to develop and grow within the human body a specific designer organ. Take it away.
No, this is amazing science. It really is. And just taken from the paper here, it says that researchers studied mice and pigs in these experiments. And in the study, researchers were able to reprogram skin cells to become vascular cells in badly injured legs that lacked blood flow. Within just 1 week, active blood vessels appeared in the injured leg. And by the second week, the leg was saved. Now, there's a video and it shows you this, and this leg's in a mess. And this really is, like we're saying, very, very cool science indeed. And Tony, I like hearing about this kind of thing, but then again, it's like you say there as well, there's the nefarious side to this as well, because it's not a perfect world that we're living in, right? And this could be used to deliver X, Y, and Z.
Yeah, it really can be. And, they say here in the article, this comes out of nature.com, it says, by using our novel nanochip technology, injured or compromised organs can be replaced. We have shown that skin is a fertile land where we can grow elements of any organ that is declining. Now, you can grow anything you want, organs or entire body. We've talked about this for a long time in the context of Dr. Craig Ventnor and his work with sequencing DNA. So what we're talking about here, folks, is that they are finally releasing to us the actual mechanisms by which they want to modify our bodies, thus modifying our brains, thus achieving the goal of control. That's where this is going. So when Kev and I are presenting these articles, and I compose the articles that are in Entangled magazine, we're showing you the evidence of what we've talked about for nearly 3 years now.
Exactly. And, they called it the Matrix when we were reading that article when it comes to Elon Musk. And if you want to call it the Matrix, then call it that. But this is the ultimate control system. Like I keep on saying, I can't believe the level that they're going down to and the level that we expose here on the show, that they're able to manipulate us down at our very thoughts, our memories. And then, like Tony was saying as well, and Joe Joseph, he done in a recent video that over on YouTube, they can literally remote control our movements. Puppets on digital strings. But of course, we're not just about the problems on here on the Kev Baker Show. And we've gone over in the past that we all have an inbuilt protection system, almost a firewall to protect us against all of this. And Tony, you covered this best because you were the one that first brought it up. Myself and Johnny, we absolutely concurred that this firewall that you talk about is basically the Holy Spirit.
It is. And the Holy Spirit is something that physically transforms our DNA once we accept Christ as our Savior and we are indwelt with the Holy Spirit. Our DNA literally is changed, and it is shielded. And we hear in Scripture read about in Scripture about the full armor of God. Well, what I'm presenting to you, along with Kevin and Johnny, is that this is the actual physical and physics and quantum explanation for the Holy Spirit. Now, that's not restricted to what I'm describing. I'm just saying this is one or more aspect of how the mechanics work. There's a spiritual aspect to it in terms of our souls, but there is also a physical aspect because you cannot separate the physical from the spiritual and vice versa. One impacts the other. So there is the ability to fight off this 5G, this DNA third strand process, this neural lace scenario. All can be blocked. And even your prayers with Jesus Christ are quantum entangled and protected and shielded by the Holy Spirit. That's the solution.
And you know, Johnny, we were starting this segment off by talking about Elon Musk, and you hit the nail on the head because sometimes I'm blown away by the guy's ideas, the way he's innovative, and reusable rockets, Mars, that kind of stuff, right? And then there's other times you feel like slapping him in the back of the head. So I think we should actually officially take him off the KBS Christmas card list. What do you think, John?
Oh, I would definitely take him off, Kev.
He's going to be absolutely gutted, Whistles.
Well, it should be because the way that he's going, Kev, I see it like iRobot. That's the way I see his world ending up. You know what I mean? Things that cling onto your car when you want to stop it and all that. They'll do anything to kill you. I just can't believe, Kev, that it's... He is talking about these robots being... they're going to... This could be the end of mankind, really. Do you know what I mean? And yet, he's pumping millions and millions into the thing himself. So I don't really get him, Kev.
You go and look at pictures of his Tesla kind of car factories, and it's employed or it's kind of populated and totally from kind of wall to wall, and it's massive. It's just robots everywhere. Maybe one of those robots had a word with Elon. I'm just saying. But we'll be back after the break from more with the brilliant Anthony Patch. AnthonyPatch.com, me, Kev Baker, and of course, Johnny Whistles. Don't you dare go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
And just like that, we were back from the break. I'm Kev Baker. I'm your host. This is the Kev Baker Show. We've got one segment left right here on TFRLive.com. It's not just me here tonight. I've got Johnny Whistles and Anthony Patch. And the three of us are going over a whole host of topics. You can find Anthony's work over at AnthonyPatch.com. We were talking about neural links before the break, and we're going to be getting into neutrinos. It's a natural progression, right? Neural links to neutrinos. But before we get there, Tony, there's a big event coming up in September. And no, Whistles, I'm not talking about the end of the world on September the 23rd. It's disinfo you're putting out on the net about me. But Anthony, there's a conference coming up in September, right?
There is. You and I are putting together Full Spectrum Dominance. It's a divine battle plan based upon The Art of War by Sun Tzu. And we will be presenting Alana Freeland, Dane Wigington, David Heavener, our very own Clyde Lewis. We called him our own because we're such fans of Clyde Lewis. And we're going to also have author Kathleen Urquhart joining us as well. And we're going to present a number of topics the first day, and then Kathleen and myself will be talking about the spiritual side on Sunday of everything that we set up in terms of terraforming, the full spectrum dominance coming from Alana Freeland. We'll be talking about the the aspects of predictive programming coming out of Hollywood, how Hollywood has had such a profound effect upon the psychology, the psyche of the human race. And we'll be getting that from David Heavener with his The Last Evangelist television series that he's producing. And Clyde Lewis will be talking about the occult origins of technology. So we've got a lot that we're going to present. That will be September 16th and 17th. This will be a live stream event. It'll be live online. It'll be a webinar format. We'll be broadcasting through a company called Zoom, and Zoom handles most of the universities and a lot of the government agencies for their video conferencing and webinar functions. And I'm very impressed with their services. We will begin registration. It appears Wednesday of this week when I come back on with you, Kev. I should have the final word on registration. We're asking for $10 per day just to cover our costs because we're using a very professional organization and service that is hosting the webinars for us. So we do need to cover those costs. And this is going to be tip of the spear information. This will be information from each of these keynote speakers that you've not heard before. I've asked each one of them, they have an hour apiece, to come in prepared with very unique, very specific, and very newsworthy information within their relative areas of research and publication. So it will not be disappointing, and it will not be a rehash of the things that you've heard them on the Kev Baker Show and the Anthony Pat Show in the past, because they've all been guests on our shows, including Clyde Lewis from Ground Zero Radio, and he's a good friend of Kev Baker and myself. So it should be a very informative weekend. It is 16 hours of broadcasting, but I do recommend that people bring pen and paper and pay attention. It will be available later on. If you can't make it on the weekend, it'll be on demand for 30 days following September 16th and 17th. It'll be 7 days before your September 23rd date, Kev and Johnny.
Oh, that's September the 23rd. But any of these speakers, you know, they would headline any conference in their own actual right. They really would. And that's not kind of name dropping, but these people that Anthony's lined up, you heard the names there. I mean, Johnny, they really are the best at the topics that they cover. And that's why it really is going to be, like Anthony said there, tip of the spear stuff.
Well, that's when Anthony was reading out the people that are going to be appearing on that, Kev, I was actually blown away because some of the names on there, do you know what I mean? That is going to be off the charts. That is definitely going to be off the charts, that one. It'll be fantastic.
It really will. And, you know, Jabber, baby Wookie in the chat room, Tony, says she met David's son last weekend. He's a stellar young man. And David Heavener, what an absolute gentleman that guy is. It's been a pleasure the couple of times I've spent airtime with David. And, of course, his daughter as well. She's a fighter jet pilot, Tony, right?
Yes, indeed she is. I mean, these guys are, you know, they're kind of, you know, what they kick and take names, this family. And, you know, David Heavener, 30 years in Hollywood as a producer, very well known, and he's stepping out of Hollywood to go down his own path of producing a scripture-based television series. It'll be broadcast on Roku and Amazon Fire Stick and some other internet channels. And this will be a television series that he has been nice enough to ask us to be technical advisors on. And so we're welcoming David to come in and give us not just, you know, sort of the dirt on Hollywood, but really to speak of what I would consider to be psychological operations on the public by way of predictive programming coming out of the media.
You know, Tony, it could be so easy for a David Heavener, and there must be a lot of people like him out there, to just stay part of that Hollywood system. It's regular money, don't rock the boat, that kind of social life going on. And that's why, I mean, I so take my hat off to that guy. He talks about following the truth and on a mission from God, quite literally. And, you know, to turn your back on all of that and to set up on your own the way he's doing, that's brave. That really is brave. And if only we could see more people from that kind of world doing what David's doing, just think of the difference we could make, because he comes with that expertise as well. And we need to pull on that. We need to know how to get to bigger audiences with the message that we've got.
Yeah, he's forming his own network, internet broadcast network, and we're going to be a part of that as well, helping him to get that off the ground. And, you know, as important as it is to get the word out, the word that he's getting out is information that basically you'd consider him to be a whistleblower. So if you've ever wanted to hear from a Hollywood insider who's not necessarily, you know, a celebrity who's coming out and saying, oh, this happened to me, or I saw this. No, you're coming from, let's say, the operational side, the behind the camera side of Hollywood, in which he's talking about the mechanisms of programming people. So this really is a whistleblower situation. And if we step over to Dane Wigington and his geoengineering organization, he's going to be talking again about the full spectrum dominance of the terraforming of the planet. His topic will be headed as terraforming, and that ties into what we were just talking about in terms of the nanoparticles that have been, you know, sprayed upon us and that are in our GMO foods. It's coming from the environment that will result in this third strand of DNA. So he'll be targeting that. And, you know, we titled the conference Full Spectrum Dominance because I literally stole that from Alana Freeland, because Alana talks about and has published a book called Full Spectrum Dominance. But it's so apropos because each of the topics that everyone's speaking to falls under that larger umbrella of the dominance of the world. Full spectrum dominance is a military term. It's a military type of campaign to dominate all aspects, whether it's electromagnetism all the way down to bullets and boots on the ground. You dominate everything on the battlefield. And we're bringing Sun Tzu's art of war into this so that we can illustrate to people that we literally are on a battlefield for our lives. This is not hyperbole. We're presenting to you the hard science, the hard research from these experts in their field, including the spiritual side with Clyde Lewis on the occult origins of the technology that is employed in dominating the spectrum. So we weave all of this together so that you can see how integrated all of the technologies and the spiritual aspects are. And the spiritual aspects we'll take care of on Sunday with author Kathleen Urquhart.
No, I urge everyone to check that out. And for more details as they become available, check out anthonypatch.com. Now, I'm going to cut in. We were going to speak about neutrinos. However, we opened up the show speaking about Hurricane Harvey and the devastation that it has wreaked so far. Breaking news right now, and it says here, a chemical emergency spurs, quote, take cover order in LaPorte, Texas. A chemical leak emergency is prompting orders for LaPorte and Shoreacres, Texas residents to take cover and turn off their air conditioning and heating systems. This is the Lone Star State deals with the emergency needs of the victims of Hurricane Harvey. Now, Tony, it says that LaPorte is about 26 miles east of Houston and has a population of approximately 35,000 people.
Yeah, that is dangerous. As people, I'm sure, know, all along the Texas and Louisiana coastline of the coast are massive concentrations of natural gas wells and oil wells, and all of those have been shut down. They've pulled the crews off well in time. They were evacuated. The oil wells obviously are at risk for damage from the initial winds, and what they've been anticipating is exactly what you're just now talking about. And because of the onshore oil and natural gas storage facilities, along with all the refineries, and the refineries have been shut down for days, this is what we're facing. We're facing the damage to the infrastructure that is going to release these chemicals into the water. So you have now not only the threat of cholera because of the sewage systems being overrun by water, but now you have the threat of chemicals being released into the water and into the air at the same time. So this is very serious. If we do have, and Kev, you got your notes there, of the nuclear power plant that we looked up just before the show, we may have a situation with that as well. We'll have to see if the floods overwhelmed that power plant, such as what happened at Fukushima.
I'm just digging up the name of that one again here, and this one is actually. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's actually called, and I'm just zooming in on it here. It's south of Houston, just southwest maybe, and it's called STPNOC. And when I click on that there, I'll go to the website, and it says that STP employs it's a nuclear power plant of some point, Tony. It looks like those Shiva lingas that we were actually talking about on previous shows in the past. But this, like I say, it's right on the shoreline, south of Houston. And you'd have to imagine that this is absolutely inundated with water. And then this is it might not be an earthquake this time that's caused the flooding, but it's similar to Fukushima, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that is a GE-designed nuclear reactor system there, but if it is, hopefully they placed their backup generators well above the water level, because that was the problem at Fukushima, where the generators were flooded out by the tsunami, and they ended up losing power, which caused the pumps that circulate the cooling water to keep the control rods cooled. That's what resulted in the meltdown of the core. Now, I have no information on this nuclear plant. I don't even know the name of it.
It says here the South Texas Nuclear Project Electric Generating Station, known as STP-EGS or STNP, or the South Texas Nuclear Project, is a nuclear power station southwest of Bay City, Texas. Now, it occupies 12,000 acres on the site on the Colorado River, about 90 miles southwest of Houston. It consists of two Westinghouse pressurized water reactors and is cooled by a 7,000-acre reservoir, which eliminates the need for cooling towers. Only recently did the capacity of Palo Verde Nuclear Generating Station surpass these Texas units.
Okay. Yeah. Well, let's just again say a lot of prayers that this nuclear power plant, the nuclear reactor that powers the steam turbines that spin the generators, let's just pray that that is intact and has power and is able to maintain the pumping to cool the rods. If not, the breaching of the refineries and the oil and natural gas storage tanks will be irrelevant in the face of a radioactive incident. So, yeah, that's very sobering. I'm going to do some research after the show to see what's going on, see what I can find out about the power plant.
Yeah, absolutely. And Johnny, I mean, you weren't here for the opening segment of the show. I'd love to get your thoughts, and so you can share your kind of ideas about what you've seen with this storm, because this is, to say it's horrendous doesn't even cover it.
No, you're right, Kev, because when I watched a few of the videos on YouTube, and there is absolutely loads. Everybody is covering it. But some of the sites we're actually seeing pulling people from water and things. And with that nuclear reactor, Kev, like right on the shore, it just seems to be the stupidest place to put one. And Fukushima would be a perfect example of that. But the thing is, Kev, most of these things are either on fault lines. It's like they're waiting for something to happen with these things. I don't know why they put them in these places, because it's crazy. And that one, I really, really hope that nothing happens to that one, Kev, because it would be total disaster.
Yeah, the reason that they're on coastlines and next to rivers and bays and things like that is for the water, because they need a large amount of water for the cooling operations. Now, this was a 7,000-acre cooling pond, so they didn't have to have cooling towers. I mean, that, again, is just an indication as to why they're on the coastline. But, yeah, like Kev California, they have it sitting. What is it? It's not the Palo Verde. It's a Rancho. No, that's in Sacramento. Too many names. Anyway, there's one in Southern California right on the coast. San Onofre nuclear power plant. They have 2 reactors there, and those have been deactivated for many years, decommissioning. But it's built right on a known fault line. But that's because they needed the water. They kind of just take a crapshoot with it, I guess.
Maybe that's like some kind of built-in safety device in case it does go China syndrome. When it starts melting through the floor, at least it's got somewhere to fall to, guys, you know.
Oh, sure.
Oh, Kev,
Yeah.
Kev, look at
Okay.
Fast Lane. I can remember in fishing in Fast Lane out on a boat, and one of the people there told me that the nearer you are to Fast Lane, the warmer the water is, and that's where you get a lot of fish.
It really is. You know, why we ever went down this kind of nuclear power plant road is beyond me, but the insanity of having them on fault lines, it's beyond me. And you look at Japan and it's just a giant earthquake waiting to happen. And they've got how many of these nuclear plants over there? It really is. It's insanity, guys. It really, really is. And you know, Tony, we've got about 8 minutes left, and we were going to go from the neural lace into neutrinos before we covered that breaking news there. What's happening with these neutrinos? And to give the audience a little idea of what goes on behind the scenes. I mean, you probably all think Johnny whistles. He's the practical joker out of the 3 of us. But let me assure you that Mr. Patch is his equal at times, because he was pulling Johnny's leg about how one of these neutrinos had been caught by a submarine. Tony, terrible.
Oh, no.
Terrible.
Fell for it.
Now, neutrino detectors are usually in the bottom of mine shafts. They are in pure water containers, stainless steel. Neutrinos can pass right through solid matter. They can pass right through the earth. And the reason for putting them so far underground and isolating is to isolate gamma rays and X-rays and other accelerated particles like protons and electrons, so that they are pretty much left with just streams of neutrinos. Neutrinos don't have any mass and they don't have any charge, but they are thought to be a candidate for dark matter. In fact, the article I'm reading right here, I'll read one sentence. It says, "So it is obvious that the neutrinos are the searched dark matter." Well, that hasn't been proven. But what I'm getting at here is that I'm reading an article that is talking about neutrinos, and this is from the Journal of Geology and Geophysics, and it's entitled Earth Expansion by Neutrino Power. And this has to do with neutrinos penetrating to the core of the planet and causing an expansion of the planet because of the neutrinos heating up the core. Now, Kev, this is something we've talked about in the context of strangelets and the expansion of the planet, haven't we?
We have, and you know, this expanding Earth, this is a theory that I came across a while ago. And I don't know what it is, Tony, but there's something that resonates with me. And if this is kind of a scientific process behind something that could lead to an expansion event, I mean, this is quite interesting.
It is, but you know what? I've hung around you and Johnny too long, and I've hung around the Woo crew too much, because you've warped my mind. And when I look at Earth expansion and they attribute it to neutrinos, which have no mass, have no charge, meaning they are not positive or negative, and they're so rarely occurring, and then they want to throw in this little thing about, dark matter. It smacks of them trying to assign the tectonic plate separation, known as earthquakes, to neutrinos when it's a cover story, a cover explanation for the dreaded strangelets.
Well, I think this warping of your mind, as you call it, it's done you the world of good, Anthony. I think that's exactly the way you have to look at things. And, I was going to say to you, I mean, how do you detect something that has no mass? I mean, by definition, it's not got any mass. So how on earth can you detect these things? And this is almost like their search for these elusive gravitational waves as well, Tony, at the LIGO.
Ooh, gravitons. Yeah, LIGO.
Yeah, and the gravitational waves. I mean, that thing's like the most expensive giant ruler in the world.
Yeah, I just got another article that came in today, in fact, about gravitons and the LIGO, that they're thinking, they're anticipating that they're going to prove. I thought they already did last year, and then you and I slammed it, and we did a show, and I did an article, and this whole thing, and we debunked gravity and gravitons last year, back in, I think it was September. But anyway, back then with LIGO, they were saying, yes, we've definitively proven gravitons exist. Well, now in this article I read today, I'm sorry I didn't get a chance to send it to you, but they're saying, we think because there are two neutron stars that are coming together, that we are going to finally detect and prove the existence of gravitons, thus gravity. Well, how can you do that? How can you go from last year to this year? And now on top of this, they're talking about neutrinos being the explanation for the earthquakes we're seeing due to the expansion of the Earth, due to the heating of the core, due to the absorption of neutrinos. Neutrinos have been hitting the Earth forever. We don't have a massive increase in neutrinos hitting the Earth. I mean, the magnetosphere and magnetopause are not that damaged that we're seeing suddenly a huge increase in neutrinos. I think it's a cover story for the fact that they've been producing at CERN and at Brookhaven strangelets since March of last year, and perhaps even earlier. So,
well, it's important that
much ado about nothing.
It's important we bring in Brookhaven, Tony, because we mentioned it earlier in the show with reference to Hurricane Erin. And so much of the time when we're talking about these particle colliders, we talk about CERN as if, not me and you, but per se, or our listeners, but it's almost as if CERN's the only game in town. But the level, that 10 TeV to achieve the strangelets, that was achieved at Brookhaven well longer before it was ever achieved at CERN, right?
Absolutely, yes, indeed. And Brookhaven, like most laboratories, in fact, all laboratories that do particle physics work with linear and circular synchrotron accelerators, are all proof of concept laboratories in which they transfer their proven processes through experimentation. They transfer that technology to CERN for application on a larger scale. So yes, the strangelets began at Brookhaven, and then the same process of reaching 10 TeV and beyond, which they're now at 13.5 and 14, and even as high as 1 peta-electron volts, which we broke that news in September of last year, October of last year, and then in November, CERN admitted that we were correct. They actually came out and said they hit 1.14 PeV, that's peta-electron volts. They're down at the tera-electron volts. All they need is 10 tera-electron volts when they produce strangelets. They've been producing that for at least a year in the Alice detector, one of the 4 detectors at CERN.
Whistles, fire up the cryostasis machine. Anthony Patch is on fire, and we're running out of time here. I want you to hold all that energy and that thoughts, Anthony, because you'll be back with us right here on KBS Live on Wednesday night, and I can't wait to get back into it. Absolutely brilliant show again tonight, folks, and I thank all of you out there for encouraging us to take this second hour. It's absolutely brilliant, and as you heard there towards the end of the show, Anthony Patch is absolutely nailing it. And if you want more of that, join us again on Wednesday night. And tomorrow night, we've got Gary Heseltine on the show. We're going to have a UFO fest right here on KBS. Till then, ever you are, make TFR.
And didn't touch that dial.
God bless you all.
This is the Kev Baker Show. Seeking answers to age-old questions. Deciphering the world painted around you by the mainstream media. This is the Kev Baker Show. And now, here is your host, Kev Baker.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome back, everyone. It's Monday, and are we ready for a week of live radio with me, your host, Kev Baker? right here on the Kev Baker Show on TFRlive.com. Hope you've all had a nice, refreshing weekend. I've recharged the batteries. I am raring to go, waiting to hear the music there at the start of the show. And that's it now. An amazing transformation takes place, and I become the Kev Baker Show for the next 2 hours. It's going to be a brilliant 2 hours yet again tonight, because it's Monday, and Mondays mean that we get to spend some quality time with our good friend, a fellow host on the network, author, researcher, and the man we love. That is, of course, Mr. Anthony Patch. He's with us here again tonight. You can find him over at anthonypatch.com. Johnny Whistles, I believe, will be back with us in hour number 2 tonight, so we can catch up with John and we can get a little laugh about why he wasn't there for Freaky Friday. But more of that coming up. And of course, Anthony, it's great to have you back tonight. And I hope you've enjoyed your weekend. We had another brilliant show over on your show on Friday. And here we are again. I keep saying it, but time is speeding up, man.
Yeah, it's kind of like those revolving doors at the hotel. They keep smacking us in the butt and making us go back to work.
But how is it, though, that even though we've increased all the shows we now do 6 hours of live radio a week, and yet there still isn't enough time to cover all the topics, Tony?
I think you better talk to Chris Geo and see what we can do about getting some more airtime.
Oh, don't. You're creating an absolute animal here. But, Tony, I'm over here in the UK, and obviously news this weekend has been dominated by these absolutely horrendous scenes that are coming out of Texas. We've had Hurricane Harvey, as predicted, slamming into the Texas coast. Freaky Friday, we were watching as it moved from a Category 3 to a Category 4. And some of the images that I've seen, Tony, of some of the flooding that's happening there, I mean, it's probably quite easy to call it biblical-type flooding, but, I mean, it's not exaggerating, is it?
No, not at all. And, first of all, our thoughts and prayers, of course, go out to everyone in the storm area and everyone that's affected by this. And I think that one thing to keep in mind is the economic impact, because not only do we have just massive numbers of homes, but we've got businesses that really, for all intents and purposes, may never come back. Trying to track, basically from South Carolina, North Carolina, up along the eastern seaboard, and that it would continue up the eastern seaboard to just above New York, just above Boston, and then track off into the ocean to the east. However, at the same time that the synchrotron particle accelerator at Brookhaven was active, the storm path took a direct turn to the west. If you picture yourself putting your thumb over the hurricane track, over the map, and trace out a thumb that is pointing due west towards New York, that's the shape of the storm path, the hurricane path, where it was pulled directly towards New York. And then once the synchrotron particle accelerator at Brookhaven was switched off, it immediately looped back to the east, retracing to the north along the seaboard its original intended pathway as predicted by the Weather Service. Now, this is something that has not been presented very much in the public arena, but that is definitely what happened, Hurricane Aaron, and Kev has put up the link from Wikipedia. So even Wikipedia has this hurricane in its track indicated. But that's something that, from a physics standpoint, is feasible. When you consider the strong magnetic lines of force that come off of a ring-based synchrotron particle accelerator, there is that potential. And we don't know all of the technology that was employed in this directed energy scenario, but it is very odd to look at the timing of that storm path altering at what appears to be simultaneously the energizing of a directed energy weapon towards the Twin Towers.
And I've even posted a picture in the chat room at tfrlive.com/chat. And you can see exactly what you're describing there, Anthony. That is a really strange path. And, like you were saying, we can't prove this is what happened when Brookhaven were turning the machine on. But these energies that are given off, I mean, these are basically cosmic rays. So it is feasible that that could be directed as some kind of energy weapon. And then when we see this kind of erratic path that it took, certainly worthy, again, of more investigation. And if we come back to present day, Tony, and what's going on in Texas right now, there might be people out there that think, well, why on earth's name would they do something like this? And of course, it's economic. And we've got this Agenda 21 thing where they want to force everyone into these big, huge mega cities. Not that Houston isn't a mega city in itself, but there's a lot of reasons why they would either steer one of these or entirely conjure one up with their weather weapons.
Yeah, and, I'm going to be a little bit reluctant to really go down that path. I want to see how this thing plays out a little more, and kind of like I did with the Mandela effect, I held off in that situation for 6 months, taking a look at what was going on with the Mandela effect before I really, gave any public statements about it. So whether
almost, that's right, 16 years to September the 11th, 2001. Now, we all know that day became very, very famous for all the wrong reasons. But did you know, at the very same time as all of that was going on in New York, just off the coast, there was a hurricane called Erin. And this was another hurricane that acted very, very strangely indeed. And Anthony, you had heard about this hurricane, and of course you with your scientific mind, you were able to kind of connect more of the dots here. And we're pulling on some of the research from Judy Wood as well, but this is another hurricane where it could have the fingerprints or kind of telltale signs that HAARP was involved.
Yeah, Dr. Judy Woods put out a fantastic book. I don't have it right in front of me at the moment. Maybe you can find the name of that while I'm talking, but I do want to give credit to her because she did some great investigative work in which she provided some phenomenal photographic evidence of the debris of 9/11, and specifically the steel beams that were literally appearing like pasta, the way that they had been melted and twisted. So there's also been some research that she put out, as well as other people, that there was a directed energy weapon utilized. And I'm going to be specific about that. The scenario that is being offered up, I have no proof, but the scenario that's been offered up is a directed energy weapon consisting of accelerated particles, accelerated by the synchrotron particle accelerator, a ring-based accelerator at Brookhaven National Laboratory in New York, not far from the Twin Towers, that at the same time as this 9/11 event, the synchrotron was in active mode. It was accelerating particles, and it does appear that there is a straight line of sight between the laboratory from the synchrotron to the Twin Towers. And interestingly, the local zoning regulations for the height restrictions of the buildings between the 9/11 towers and the laboratory itself all mandated a maximum height, which would have allowed a straight line of sight projection of particles from Brookhaven directly at the towers. Now, Dr. Judy Wood put that out, and there's some other people that put that out. That's not my research, but that's just something else to keep in mind. Now, besides that scenario, we have the hurricane. So did you want to jump in there?
No, on you go, Tony, because this is, like you were saying there, I mean, we can't say this is exactly what happened. And in fact, we agreed before the show that the one thing we do know about 9/11 is that we'll never have a clear picture of the exact sequence of events that happened that day.
Yeah, that's very true. The Hurricane Erin, the track that it was providing on radar just prior to the towers being attacked indicated that it was going of any type. Most of them are high water capable, and certainly boats, because yesterday the media was putting out an all call through the governor, through the mayors, an all call to the citizens for small boats to conduct rescues. In my opinion, that does not seem appropriate. I think the military should have been able to handle that. Go ahead.
No, I absolutely see where you're coming from here, Tony. But again, maybe it's just as well that the citizens have been allowed in to help here, because if it was anything like Katrina, we would probably have FEMA just locking off the city for a couple of days and everyone would be left to their own devices. So it's good to see people actually going and helping one another, especially in America at this time when the media are pushing this whole division, the fact that we're on the verge of some kind of civil war, but yet when some kind of disaster hits, we soon forget our politics and we know we can come together. We have to come together. And something else I want to speak about with this storm, Tony, is the path that it's taken. Now, like I was admitting to you before we came on air, I mean, I'm no kind of meteorologist. I don't watch these storms, how they track up through the Gulf of Mexico, etc. But there was talk of this one coming up, going into Houston, dumping all of this water, going back out, and then coming in again. Now, we've had a little look at the path of the storm, Anthony, and it's not exactly your typical hurricane, is it?
No, even when the eye of the storm initially was offshore, the National Weather Service made the comment that they had never seen a computer model of the projected pathway such as was being displayed. And this, again, was when it was offshore. They were showing it moving right up into the, into the San Antonio area and Corpus Christi, right on the coast, and that it was making a loop. Once it hit landfall, it would extend in a ways, and then it would loop back, almost to follow and retrace its own pathway, its own steps, and then go offshore. And they were, several of the scientists were saying, we have never seen a storm do that before. And now today, that's exactly what it's doing. And it is actually going to make a third landfall now, and it's going to track the eye of it right into Houston once more, and eventually head due north and northeast away from Dallas itself for people who want a point of reference.
And, I do find this quite interesting. And, of course, we often speak to people like Ilana Freeland and Dane Wigington as well. We ourselves bring up HARP, Tony, the High Aurora Active Research Program up in Gacona, Alaska. And it's certainly worthy of further investigation, i.e. was HARP on at the time, because we know they have these weather weapons. And when it's hurricanes and HARP, there's something that came into my mind today, and I was sharing with you before the show, and I bet when we actually put this out on air, there's going to be some listeners out there who had no idea that this was going on. Because there was, if we go back 16 years.
So the economic impact on people is going to be felt for years. And FEMA has even said they're going to be in the area for many, many years.
And they're expecting maybe up to another 50 inches of rain to drop on Houston, which seems to be one of the most affected areas. I heard them saying today, they were actually referring to it as the Gulf of Houston. But some of the kind of facts here coming out, it says Hurricane Harvey has left thousands homeless in Houston, with 5,000 people currently in shelters, number expected to rise. We've got another 50 inches of rain. We're going to talk about the path of this storm in just a moment. We've also got two major dams 20 miles outside of the city that are being drained, and that, of course, is adding to the problem, sending more water into homes. Despite the unfolding disaster, the mayor has still not issued a mandatory evacuation order across the city. Now, scores of residents are taking to social media, having to beg for help for people to come and get them out of their houses. 911 or 911 operators are stretched to their limit. There was a backlog of 150 calls at any given time on Sunday. We've got the Red Cross, they're fundraising, and we've got celebrities as well. And it's going to take a lot of money to get that anywhere near what it was. It says the official death toll, it's unknown. But before the show, Anthony was informing me that, unfortunately, terrible news is that so far 6 people have lost their lives. And it's a horrible thing to say, but with this still developing and really we're yet to see the full toll, probably, the human toll of this disaster. And it says here, finally, Tony, that Texas Governor Greg Abbott has deployed the entire National Guard of 12,000 to rescue stranded citizens. And we'll start there because you were saying to me that while you were watching the images of this, there was something missing. It didn't seem like much military there, was there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't control the television cameras, and they're trying to keep their reporters out of the extreme areas, out of the harm's way. But with that said, we really don't see much activity on the part of the U.S. military. Now, I understand that the National Guard, 5,000 troops and that sort of thing from the state itself being deployed. But even at that, I don't see very many high water vehicles like 2.5 ton, 5 ton, 10 ton trucks, and not many Humvees that at least are absent from the camera images. Now, I'm not in, a position to say that they're not doing their job. It just seems odd to me, and I would appreciate it if the media would begin broadcasting images of what the military is actually doing. And for people that are not familiar with Texas, Fort Hood, Texas, is right there to the west of Houston and just south of Austin. And it's smack dab in the middle of this entire storm, where the worst of it, the center, the eye tracked right on through. And yet I've not heard any reports about, an impact as far as damage to Fort Hood. But it sure seems to me, with the number of personnel, the trucks,